Alright, so I'm getting set up to ink here for my value page. Real quick, with these 3 little squares here, this one is already going to be checkered if you'll remember the example. So these 2 right here are just going to be foreground, background reversal. So I'm going to erase our little crosshair marks that I made earlier for this half. So I just like to kind of try to plan things out beforehand, so all this area outside of my shape is going to be just colored in with ink. For this little area here, that's what I'm going to color in with ink. And then over here on the checkered, let's say I'm going to do black on the outside, black on the inside, again on the inside, and black on the outside. So you just want to make sure that they're alternating as you're going around there. But in order to set up, what I'm first going to start off with doing is coloring in this top part here. All I want to see here is as many shades of black and gray that you guys can get. So a couple of them can be repeated. I know that it's a little difficult to try to get this many shades of gray, but just try to do your best. This is just helping you see those different values that you can get with a single color. So here we're just going to be using our ink. It came in a little box that just looks like this. So I'm just going to throw down some ink here. I'm actually going to be working sideways, I guess, so that way I'm not too far away from my page here. And what I like to do is, you guys probably saw this tape on my sleeve. I like to put the tape on my sleeve because it helps get rid of some of that stickiness. So that way, whenever you're taking the tape off of your paper later on, it's not going to completely rip up the whole piece of paper. I also have some here on my pant leg, so I'm just going to tape off the borders here. This is going to ensure that I have a neat and clean border, which is what I'm looking for. Alright, so I'm ready to go. I also have a little card here to test out some of the inks on as I'm working, so that way I can ensure that I'm working with a similar, if not the same, hue of gray, so that way I don't mess up. I like to kind of try to grid them off as I'm working a little bit. I think it helps a lot. It allows me to paint a little bit faster. So I like to just start off with like a little puddle of water, so that way I can just get a general easy kind of gray going here. Test it real quick. Okay, sure, that's fine. You don't necessarily have to go in the same direction or anything, but while it is wet, it's best to just try to get a very solid, clear, even shade. Okay, and that's all that you really need to do there. I'm just adding a little bit more of the ink to my pile here. Oh look, it's a little bit darker, so I'll go over here. Again, try to color it in, paint it in pretty quickly. And that's why I enjoy using the tape method. It just lets you work so much faster. I know it takes a while to kind of get the tape down, but in the end, it really is worth it. And whenever you're working with a little ink pile, you can always like add more water in it as you feel is necessary. That way you're able to get lighter shades of the ink. Really, it's up to you how you want to go about this. But what I did want to demonstrate for you guys is what happens if you are going over one place too much. And this is what really happens whenever you aren't using the tape method and you're trying to get in those little boxed corners. You know, you're just like, oh, I have to paint this little rectangle perfectly, and you're just going back and forth a lot. So here, after going back and forth multiple times, what that did was it got the paper really wet, so whenever you get paper wet, it wants to turn back into that pulp state. So the water caused the paper to begin to peel up a little bit. So if you see, whenever I try to paint anywhere else, some of those little pieces of paper kind of followed with the brush. So just make sure that you're using the tape method or not going over the same area too many times, so that way you can prevent this from happening to your pieces. Very important. Another thing that's important is you want to wait for your ink to be dry whenever you're peeling up the tape. If not, then if the ink has not set and has not had the time to dry yet, what will happen is it'll make a mess and you'll just get ink kind of spreading out because it wasn't completely set into the paper yet. So it'll begin to try to go off on the edges and you'll have a mess happen. So to try to prevent that, make sure you are working at a pretty good pace and not trying to do things too terribly quickly to prevent the ink from getting all over the place. I'm working on top of my page here. It should be fine so long as I'm not using too much water on my palette paper. Actually, I might go ahead and just put a paper towel underneath this just in case, but okay, so whenever I lifted up my tape, this little part right here just kind of bled through the tape, actually, is what I saw as soon as I lifted up my piece of tape. So I'm just taking some water here with some inked up water, and I'm just going to try to distribute the ink that passed over to the best of my ability without, best I can, without without the paper ripping up. Okay, so it's getting a little too gritty for me, and if I continue painting over it like I am, the paper is going to start peeling up and it's just not going to look good. So I'm just going to leave it at that. So now I'm going into the middle section and erasing some of my lines on the two sections to the right. This way I'll be able to go in and ink without any ghost pencil marks happening. So I'm starting with a very light shade of gray. You can barely see it, and honestly I messed up and some phantom pencil lines were starting to come in. I'm keeping one of my little printouts close by just to remind myself which parts to color in. Next, I'm going into the middle section where I'm working with a darker hue of gray, so just adding more ink into my water. Here, the little pencil marks are blending in a little bit better, so they're less visible here, which works out fine. Which brings me to my last section, where I'm using primarily ink with just a few drops of water to help distribute the pigment out over the shapes. So when I peeled up the tape, I saw some of the ink seeped underneath the tape into my gridded area. So I'm making both boxes a little darker, and I'm just trying to peel up some of that paper that is creating that lighter space there in the corner. So that way I can go over it once it is fully dry. On these next two sections, we are doing the foreground background reversal with our shape using black and white. So on the first section, I am coloring in the background
with ink, just using a little bit of water since we are looking for a pretty stark difference between the black and white. And on the next section here, I'm just coloring my shape and leaving the background white. On the last section, we're simply doing the checkered pattern. So in the top square of that section, doing the background black and leaving the shape white. Vice versa on the two neighboring sections of it, and then on the diagonal section, as you can see here, I am making the background black. So that's why it's a good idea to go ahead and kind of mark which will be which ahead of time. Wouldn't you believe it? The ink seeped under the tape again. So you may choose to just trust your hand and not use the tape for these last few sections, but I am going back in and I'll fix that later on with gouache that came in the kit. So to take an image, I'm just using some tape on all four corners of my value page here. As you add ink onto the page, it'll begin to get a little warped, which doesn't make for a good image, so be sure to tape it down before you take your picture and it should come out good. And that's all I have.